We are the Department of Media and Communication of the Asian Studies Student Council. Today, we are here to talk with Professor Sophie Kim about Asian studies, its significance, and advice for current and prospective students. Professor, could you briefly introduce yourself and your field of study?
Hi, my name is Sophie, and I did my PhD in political science. So my background is in international relations and political philosophy. And my work is mostly centered around issues of Korean division and North Korea and its role in international relations.
So thank you for sharing that. And I would like to move on to the next question, that what initially drew you to that field?
Well, I guess my work is in relation to, it's pivoted more towards Asian studies. So my field is in international relations, and geopolitics. Well, I think, I started out, studying, being a political scientist, studying political science, and then I've traveled around a lot. And I think for me, my experience studying Japanese in Kyoto and studying Mandarin in Taiwan, I've lived in Asia and throughout my career, and I became more and more interested in peace and militarization and issues of peace and security. So I was mostly introduced to this field mostly because of my background as a Korean American and as part of the diaspora. And I became interested in my own personal legacy of the Korean War and the Korean division. So I would say that my interest in the field started out as a personal commitment to understand what would the future look like to end a conflict in a place that has sort of intergenerational ties. So that would be my sort of inspiration. And naturally, I started not only studying and researching about the Korean division, right, the relations between North and South Korea, but this conflict on the Korean Peninsula bleeds into regional conflict. So it involves regional actors, involves international actors. So something that initially started out as kind of a private, personal, and local investigation became a much broader question about international relations and geopolitics. And my goal as a teacher is to really show that there are real stakes in studying this region, and it's both tied to something personal, micro, and macro.
Then building on that point, regarding your field, what do you think makes Asian studies meaningful or important today?
I think, it's very evident we're living in a time of multiple global crises, and young people generally feel very precarious in many ways. And I think that Asia has just a very complex history since the end of the since the end of the Pacific War, end of World War II, and Cold War. And there's still a lot of unresolved tensions. And we see that specifically with the two major geopolitical hotspots in the world, which is North and South Korea and Taiwan and China. And, eventually these hotspots need to be resolved. And they need to be resolved through civilian and citizen action and through democratic process. And I think the last resort that we want for regional conflict is something that is military and war, right? And so in that sense, I think that what Asia Study has to offer is really trying to build a kind of cosmopolitan and democratic vision for this region. So it's more about peace and coexistence rather than sort of state-centric nationalism or other ways that can potentially lead to conflict. Yeah.
Then shall we move on to your specific era, North Korea? I want to ask about how can students approach North Korea beyond the usual focus on nuclear weapons or dictatorship, even images of North Korea poverty, often presented on the media?
I think North Korea studies is very complex because on one hand, it's not really, it's understudied. And on the other hand, there are too many mediations and too many representations of North Korea as either a completely hostile state or as a totalitarian regime on the verge of collapse. And I think that one of the goals of trying to teach North Korea is not only to understand how it emerged in this kind of international system, but also give the students the opportunity to reflect on how they might participate in reproducing the bias and prejudices of North Koreans. And I think the main goal of this class, North Korea, is really, the curriculum was built really for South Korean students and foreign students. If they were to meet a North Korean in the world, like, I really wanted them to not engage them with ignorance or prejudice, but they already had some kind of background knowledge, and they've also critically thought about their country's relationship to North Korea, such that maybe future meetings, right? They might be meeting as students, they might be meeting as co-workers, someone might be a diplomat, right? But they've already had a certain kind of training to meet someone from North Korea, and to be able to actually have more productive and ethical conversation. So that was really the goal of really trying to get students to think critically about North Korea is for the future, for when they meet.
That's a really significant answer for everyone, especially the Asian studies people. And we should touch upon another question about how does studying North Korea change the way we understand modern Asia or the Cold War in Asia?
I think North Korea is actually it's often known as a black hole, right? And it's also often known, even, throughout Asia, it's sort of seen as a rogue state, right? And even if there are sort of ideological conflicts with China and Japan and South Korea, North Korea is central to Asian security, right? Alliances. It's very central to militarization in Asia. And also North Korea sort of not only talks about, it's not only about North Korea, but it's also the kind of understudied history of Asian communism, Asian socialism, right? Asian decolonization, right? So I think North Korea also opens up an opportunity to imagine a different Asia, and what kind of Asia could have been possible had the Cold War not divided not only North and South Korea, but divided the region into sort of pro-US, pro-China, right? And I think we're still living through US-China trade, which is still a continuity of this binary thinking, this bipolar thinking. And that's an inheritance of the Cold War. And I really think North Korea, despite its notorious image, has something to offer to rethink the entire history of how Asia came to be in the modern era.
As Professor mentioned that the studying North Korea is really important for South Korea, even the global. But as we know that there are a lot of challenges in South Korea to address North Korea issues. So I want to ask about what are some challenges students should be aware of when studying North Korea across different cultural or linguistic and political contexts?
Right. As an instructor, I'm always mindful when I'm teaching North Korea that my audience is foreign students, right? And South Korean students, right? So I kind of build a question around foreign students generally will intake social media or global media, right? So it's underlying foreign students' perception of North Korea is mostly Western biases on North Korea that has supported Western policies on North Korea. And that really comes through the humanitarian issue, the human rights issue, the sanctions issue, and the nuclear weapons issue. So it's on one hand to show what is it about North Korea that is so villainized to this day? So it's also kind of showing a discussion, sort of also understanding geopolitics and international politics more broadly. I think for when I'm thinking about teaching North Korea to South Korean students, as we know in South Korea, there is the national security law, right? And there is the unending Korean War. So there is a much more cultural and historical and personal context to studying North Korea in South Korea. So I think with the field trip to the North Korean Information Center, part of it is really trying to get students to not only study North Korea as an object, right, an area, but also to put themselves in relation to not only North Korea and North Koreans or North Korean defectors, but to the study itself. Like, what does it mean to study something outside when actually you're really part of it, right? You're participating in the knowledge production of not only North Korea, but Asia. So I think what I want is students to kind of redefine their positionality through this class.
Yeah. As Professor mentioned that we have a national security law that, because of that, we should, as you can see, even background pictures not to be too political. In that case, we should think about that. How should students deal with politically sensitive topics when studying North Korea?
I think the national security law, right, mostly applies to South Korean students. So I think a lot of foreign students don't have the problem of, or at least they don't deal with the self-censorship of studying North Korea. They don't feel the guilt, right? But I think what I've noticed with our class is South Korean students initially censored themselves and felt guilty or felt like reading or seeing North Korea was somewhat taboo. So I think one of the ways in which knowledge, real democratic access to knowledge, gets blocked is when we don't have imagination and curiosity, right? It's not just the absence of physical access, but actually when we ourselves stop thinking about and stop imagining, right? And stop having curiosity. So, I think one thing I want to always encourage and, also understand that, when we should try to make the effort to study what we often are taught is taboo or bad or the enemy, right? And so I think really trying to get students to have more of the curiosity and courage to really face the politics out there, right? I think that's kind of the goal. So when you say, we often even think North Korea issues are political issues, but they're not. Studying North Korea economy is not a political issue, but it becomes politicized, given the kind of context we are in South Korea. So it's to be really, the end goal is mostly students to feel comfortable expressing political views and political expression. And so it's also trying to get there. But yeah. I do think it's a shame that, especially with our class, and it's an English class on North Korea, we can't really access 노동신문 or North Korea text or images. And I can access it through a VPN, right? But there's a limitation to the kinds of materials we can teach, not only because of the language. We can't actually read North Korean languages, but whatever is available to foreign students is not available to South Korean students. So we have to really also work with very limited texts and limited representations of North Korea. So I think that's, I hope that there's going to be a much more democratic environment to study North Korea. I think that's really key. And more and more, I hope that South Korean students feel less alienated to North Korea, but also find, it's the closest country, right? It's closer than Japan. And the fact that you're not able to know the other side is a deep problem of the Cold War. Actually, I think it's a complete legacy of the Cold War. So yeah, I think that there's some value in trying to really understand North Korea's relationship and role in Asia studies.
Thank you for the broad expectation of the North Korea and insights for us. And for the next question, I would like to ask about students who are studying or are planning to study Asian studies. Especially, what kinds of qualities or attitudes do you think are important for students who are studying or planning to study Asian studies, even this North Korea era?
Well, I think, I hope students approach Asian studies and because there's diverse, there's studies on China and there's studies on Japan and Asia and North Korea and South Korea. But the main takeaway is it's very common, I think, in today's age to, in some ways, be more rooted in one's country. But Asia studies is trying to broaden your thinking outside of your nationality and your national cultures and national identity. And so I think it's not until you actually study how actually interdependent and deeply related these states are that you can envision yourself not just as one state or one country, but you see yourself as part of a regional community. And I think that becomes a longer term vision for not only Asia studies, but Asia more broadly, given that we have more and more conflicts centered around countries, right? And countries' conflict and nationalism, patriotism. And one way to push against that is really for students to imagine, their neighbors, not just South Korea or North Korea, but also Japan and China, and sort of have a bigger vision for their future political community.
Thank you for sharing that good opinion. And finally, what advice would you give it to someone considering a future in Asian studies or North Korea studying?
I think that, I guess the advice that I would have for students who want to study North Korea or Asia studies, if this region, if this planet is your home, I think we have to take care of it. We have to take care of our planet. I think first off, we have to take care of the people in it, right? And sometimes, like I mentioned, it's very easy to think about wanting to only care about yourself or your family, your city, or your country. But when we study Asian studies, when we think about how deeply culturally and historically this region is entangled, it allows you to imagine yourself outside of your own, I think, bubble. So the advice I would have is try to approach this field with the hope that you're learning about your place. You're learning about your neighbors, right? And what you're trying to do is whatever work you do, right, whatever field and sector you go, you're trying to make everyone live better, right? And to do that, you really have to know the region. You really have to know your home.
Thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today. We believe your insights will be very helpful for current Asian studies students as well as prospective students who are interested in the field. Thank you again for joining us, and thank you for everything.
Thank you.